We continue our Terraform walkthrough, which might be one of the mostly used infrastructure as code tools. In this episode, we'll go through Terraform init, the tags, EC2, security groups, and dynamic blocks. We'll just hit upon a few points on Terraform on these topics which match programmers. The thing to know about Terraform init, which we start with, is that if you know other build tools such as Maven, then when we run even Maven clean, it downloads all the dependencies required. Terraform init will download all the dependencies needed by the Terraform project. So the command line is Terraform and this argument is init. And when we run Terraform init from the command line, it will download all the dependencies which are required. Terraform tags. So tags in Terraform helps us set additional properties on the resources. So when we go, let's say, to AWS console and we see a resource and it has a name, the question is, how do we set this name from Terraform? So in order to set this name from Terraform, we need to, in the semi-JSON structure of Terraform, to create tags, to actually write tags, and then inside curly braces, name equals the name, the actual name. So tags, curly braces, name equals MyVpc. And then when we go to the AWS console, we will see that the name is MyVpc. And now let's move on to EC2 instances. The Terraform struct, the key for EC2 instances is AWS_instance. So if we want to create a resource in Terraform of AWS instance, we write resource, AWS instance, my EC2 instance, and then in curly braces, two parameters, AMI, the image that we want, and the instance type, like t2.micro. And these are the two mandatory arguments for EC2 instances in Terraform, the AMI, the image that we want to use, and the instance type. In Terraform, we can reference other structures. Sometimes from one resource, we need to reference other resource. So let's say that we want to reference a VPC ID. How do we do this? So we write the key. So the structure is this. The structure is three parts: key, name, and ID. What is the key of VPC? AWS VPC. This is context. It's always AWS VPC dot myVpc dot ID. And this would give us the value of the ID of the VPC. Security groups. Security groups in AWS are stateful firewalls. What do we mean by stateful firewalls versus stateless? This means that if we allowed in the stateful firewall for some traffic to come in, it would automatically enable the traffic to go back in the response. So we don't need to explicitly set the input and the output. So how do we define a security group in Terraform? As usual, we write resource, AWS security group, my security group, which is the name, and then in curly braces, name is, let's call it allow HTTPS, and then we have an ingress and an egress. Ingress is input. Ingress, we say from port to port, which is a range. It doesn't mean that from port is the port that we allow in and to port are the ports that we allow out. In the AWS security group in Terraform, the from port and the to port are range. So if we specify 400 in the from port and 500 in the to port, then this would allow all the range of 400 to 500. Then we specify the protocol, TCP, and the CIDR blocks. If we want to enable all traffic, the CIDR block is 0.0.0.0/0. Then we can reference this my security group that we defined from various other resources such as EC2 instances. Terraform dynamic blocks, which is our last topic in this episode. So we said that in Terraform we have manifest, we have semi-JSON structures. In these semi-JSON structures, while it's super clear, it's not a programming language. And sometimes we do want to iterate some items, and since we don't have a programming language, it's not a Turing complete programming language, then dynamic blocks allows us to iterate variables. So we said in one of the previous episodes about Terraform that in Terraform we can have variables of type list to hold a list of items. So dynamic blocks closes the loop, and now we can iterate those dynamic vars. So what do we have inside dynamic blocks? What does it mean to have a dynamic block in Terraform? This means that we are going to have an iterator. We are going to use the for each keyword in order to iterate the items. This means that we are going to reference a variable of type list. And as we said, to reference a variable of type list in Terraform, we write var.mylistvar. And then we are going to actually get one of the, if we have a complex structure in the variable list, then we would write in the content which part of the variable do we want. How do we create a dynamic block in Terraform in order to reference such list variables in for each? So in our Terraform manifest, in the place where we want to reference this list, we write the keyword dynamic. Once Terraform sees dynamic, it knows we're going to do something complex. So we write dynamic, and then we give it a name. Let's say that in the previous security groups, if we remember, we had the ingress, and the ingress in the security group needed a parameter of port. Okay, so now let's do this dynamic. We define the security group as usual, but now instead of specifying ingress and the actual port, we are going to write dynamic ingress. Iterator is port. For each var.ingress rules, content from port is port.value. What we did here when we say dynamic and we put all the following content inside the block, it knows that it should interpret the following content block. Iterator is port because port is the name of the iterator that we are going to have. Okay, this is the assignment. Iterator port is the assignment. And for each var.ingress rules, which means that we are going to do a for each on the ingress rules. And where do we put each item? On the iterator. And the iterator is named port. Content, then from port is port.value. So in general, of course, in a podcast, we can't see the whole thing. I'll put the actual data inside the show notes. So if you want to see the code snippets in a more clear way, just look at the show notes. So basically, we use the dynamic, the iterator, the for each content, and this is dynamic blocks inside Terraforms.